She looked at the medic. She acknowledged the refusal. She left the clinic on her own bleeding feet. Krashenvel-Moren was 17 standard cycles, the last living heir of a broken tusk line, and there were 5 plasma cutters somewhere in the corridors of Waypoint Series 9 with orders to finish what the ambush at the docking ring had begun. She was supposed to die on some hallway floor tonight. Even her own body had started to agree with it. 6 standard cycles later, when the war matron of a great house sent an armored escort to that same station to collect her daughter's remains, they did not find a corpse. They found a shop above a stairwell. They found suits of hunter armor stacked like cordwood in the alley. They found a blacksmith boiling water on his forge and a girl asleep on his cot. And they understood, in the terrible slow way that revelations always arrive, that the human tongue could no longer be measured by any scan they owned. The air on Waypoint Series 9 tasted of ozone, cheap coolant, and old blood. 6 standard cycles earlier, the tip of a pulse lance had opened a clean crescent under Kessa's left tusk. It was the sort of wound that did not cauterize the way an honest burn cauterized. Pulse lances crystallized. The tissue underneath had turned to something like glass fused into her hide, and every time she moved her jaw, the shards sheared, and the shearing kept the seam weeping thick violet fluid down the plate of her chin. She had walked from the docking ring to the clinic level by counting steps. 211 of them. The lights in the hall were the same tired yellow that all mid-arm stations wore. The floor tiles clicked under the heavy pad of her hooves, in a rhythm that would not let her think straight. Her people were a heavy people. On a way station built for the average of 8 species, everything felt small around her. The doors sometimes had to open twice. The chairs did not accept her weight. Her true name, in the clicking baritone of the Vrothkai tongue, was Krashenvel-Moren. The translator patch stapled behind her ear flattened it, always to Kessa, because no human throat had ever produced the double stops in the middle. She had stopped correcting anyone about it 4 cycles ago. There was no time to correct anyone about anything anymore. The medic on Series 9 was a thin, tired man of an unremarkable species, gray-skinned, 4-fingered, wearing a stained white smock. He looked up from a slate as she came through the doorway, and his eyes went straight to the tusk mark that had been branded across her collarbone, and his face closed. "Non-signatory," he said. She held on to the doorframe. It was not exactly a request for help. She had not gotten as far as asking. She had only walked in, she said, in the trade tongue that the patch behind her ear translated automatically, "I can pay." "Non-signatory," he said again, without looking up. "I have credit shit. I have. The clinic does not treat non-signatories. Read the plaque." She did not have to read the plaque. She knew what it said. She had seen the same plaque on the last 3 stations. It said the clinic was under contract to a consortium of houses, and the Vel-Moren clan, in the last quarter cycle, had been removed from that consortium by unanimous vote of the Standing Council, and any physician who touched a Vel-Moren without prior clearance would lose his license, his stipend, his citizenship, and his teeth. "I'll bleed out in the hallway," she said, very quietly. He did not look up. "Then do not bleed out in mine." There was nothing for her to argue against, and no time to argue anyway, and she was so cold in the trunk of her body that she felt her own weight for the first time in her life, so she turned and she walked, and the door hissed shut behind her, and she stood in the yellow hallway and understood that she would not survive the night. That was when the man with the hammer put his coat on her shoulders. She had not heard him approach. He had come out of the queue behind her in the hall, 3 back, a stocky human, older than most of the humans who worked the trade lane stations. He wore heavy welding leathers that smelled of scorched oil, and he carried a beaten forge hammer at his belt on a strap that had rubbed the leather bald along the length of the haft. His face was broad and wind-burned. His nose had been broken more than once. His eyes were the color of wet slate. He said, in a slow trade tongue that was clearly not his home dialect, "You are pouring on the floor, ma'am." She looked down at herself. He was right. He took off the welding coat, which was long enough on him and would be short on her, and he laid it over her shoulders and pulled it forward with the kind of care a person used with a horse. He did not touch her skin, he did not touch her tusks. Vrothkai did not like to be touched by the tusks by strangers. She had never met a human who knew that. "Come on," he said. "I got water and I got needles. Ain't a clinic, ain't nothing, but it's clean." She could not, in that moment, remember the trade-tongue word for thank you, so she followed him. Down the hallway, past the queue that would not look at her, into a service elevator that hissed sideways rather than up, into a spoke of the station where the light was worse and the corridors smelled less of coolant and more of hot metal and lubricating grease, and finally to a door marked, in the block letters of station standard, Halstead. Plate welding, hull fitting, repair, and under the block letters, hand scratched with a stylus, no small jobs. The blacksmith punched a keypad. The door slid open on a shop that was very hot, very small, very bright, and full of tools she did not recognize. A forge burned dull orange along the back wall. An anvil the size of her chest sat on a plinth in the middle of the floor. Racks of tongs and drift pins and swages lined one wall. On the other wall, above a workbench, someone had tacked up a printout of a photograph. It was a landscape. Trees she did not know. Ground the color of an old bruise, a gray sky, snow. "Second cube up the stairs," he said. "Ain't fancy, bunk, sink, wash cell. Get in there, I'll boil water." She got in there. The stairs were metal and rang under her tread. The bunk cube was very small and very clean and smelled of soap. The cot had a blanket folded at the foot in a square, the way soldiers folded blankets. On the small shelf above the cot there was one dented mug, one paperback book whose cover she could not read, and a small photograph tucked inside a bent silver frame. The photograph showed two humans. A younger man, thin, unsmiling, and a girl of perhaps 10 in a red coat, holding a black dog by a rope. They were standing in front of a small house on a hill of dead grass. The sky in the photograph was the same gray as the sky in the printout downstairs. She sat on the cot. The cot did not accept her weight the way most furniture did not accept her weight, but it held, and she sat. And she began, for the first time since her mother's steward had sealed her onto the transport 4 days ago, and pressed a smuggler's chit into her palm, to shake. The blacksmith came up the stairs with a shallow steel bowl of boiling water, a bundle of white cloth, a small dark bottle, a needle threaded with what looked to her like fishing line, and an expression she could not read. He set the water on the shelf. He set the cloth beside it. He looked at her under her tusk. He whistled through his teeth. It was not a sound of pity, it was a sound of assessment. "Pulse lance," he said, "crystallized, ain't going to close on its own. You know pulse lances," she said. He looked at her. He seemed to think about answering. He did not. He wet the cloth and he squeezed it out. "This ain't going to feel good," he said. "You want a stick to bite? I have tusks." He almost laughed. It moved at one corner of his mouth and stopped. "So you do," he said. He worked quickly. He picked the crystals out with a pair of jeweler's forceps that she had not seen him produce. He rinsed the seam with the boiling water, and she felt her own breath hiss out between her plates, and she did not otherwise make a sound. He wet the cloth in the small dark bottle, which turned out to be a common trade lane disinfectant, and he swabbed. Then he sewed. His hands were very steady. His hands were the hands of a man who worked hot metal, and hot metal did not forgive hands that were not steady. And Kessa understood, watching the needle go in and come out, and go in and come out, and pull the seam closed with small even stitches, that she was being cared for by a person who had cared for himself many times, in exactly this manner. He finished. He tied off the thread with his teeth. He wiped the seam with a fresh cloth. He looked at his work and grunted the way a smith grunts when a weld sets clean. Then he set the bowl aside and sat on the floor across from her with his back against the wall, because there was no chair, and he watched her for a long moment as though he was still deciding something. "My name is Ray Halstead," he said. "I'm 41 Earth years. I'm from a place called Cambria County, in a place called Pennsylvania. It don't matter to you what any of that means. What matters to you is I am not going to hand you off, and I am not going to sell you, and I am going to boil more water in a minute for tea because I am tired and I do not have a plan yet. They will come," Kessa said. He looked at her. "Yes, ma'am. Tonight." "Yes, ma'am. 5 of them." He raised an eyebrow. He asked, without heat, "How you know it's 5? "I counted the boots at the docking ring." He nodded slowly. "Then it's 5, he said. "You get some rest. I got some things to move around in the shop." She should have said something. She had been raised in a house that spoke, and it spoke well, and the elders of the Velmoran clan had drilled into her from the moment she could walk that the daughter of a Warmatron did not receive kindness without answering it in words. She opened her mouth to say something. Her throat did not work. Her jaw was numb from the disinfectant, and her body was heavy with the 4 days of running that had crashed over her all at once. What she managed was, "Why?" Ray Halstead looked at her. "Because the medic said no," he said, and he went back down the stairs. She fell asleep watching the photograph on the shelf, the girl in the red coat holding the black dog. In her dream, the dog turned and looked at her, and she understood in the dream that the dog was old, and that the girl was older than the picture, and that the man in the picture had been counting the days between what had happened and what was still coming. She did not know how she knew any of this. She did not remember the dream when she woke. She woke to a sound she did not have a word for. It was very small. It was very close. It was the sound of a man breathing slow through his nose beside a door in the dark. She lay still. The cube was black. The forge downstairs had been banked. Through the crack under the door came a thin, dull red from the embers. She could hear, faintly through the shop wall, the whisper of servo limbs finding purchase on the deck plate outside. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, boots. There was a chime at the shop door, a polite chime. That was funny to her in a distant way, and she almost laughed and did not. Someone had rung the shop bell. Ray Halstead's voice from downstairs unhurried. "Come on in," the door hissed. She heard the shop lights come up. She crept from the cot to the crack of the cube door and lay flat and put one eye to it. She could see, from her angle, the anvil in the middle of the shop floor, and the man beside it, and the small object he had set on the anvil, and the object was a tungsten drift pin about the length and thickness of his thumb. He was not standing at guard. He was standing the way a man stood at his own workbench when he was between 2 jobs. The hammer hung loose in his right hand. The 5 hunters came into the frame of her vision, one after another. They moved insect-quick, low, professional. They wore hunter-cast plate that had been enameled the deep purple of a house she did not recognize. She recognized the cut, though. The plate under the arms was reinforced. The plate over the belly was not, it was fashion. The plate makers of the hunter houses had, for 6 generations, put ornament over the abdomen because the abdomen was where the sash of achievement hung, and they wanted the sash to have a smooth field. It had killed a lot of hunters. It was going to kill 5 more. The lead cutter's translator caught up half a beat after his mouth. "Step aside, human. We do not have quarrel with you. Deliver the female, you will be paid for the trouble." Ray Halstead lifted the hammer once and set it back down on the anvil, softly next to the drift pin. He was not looking at the lead cutter. He was looking at the second one back, on the left, the one whose arm had drifted just a hair from the seam of his side to bring a plasma cutter to bear. Kessa saw Ray's eyes register that motion. Then his eyes drifted in the same casual way over the other 4, in the order they had come in. He did it in less than a second. Then his eyes went back to the lead. "I ain't going to step aside," Ray said, "but you can pay for the trouble anyway. It's on the counter, cash only." There was a small silence in the shop. The kind of silence a professional felt when he understood that the civilian in front of him had just done something a civilian did not do. The lead cutter's shoulders rolled. The translator caught his voice half a beat late again. "As you wish." Then a lot of things happened very fast. Later, when she made herself recount it, Kessa would have 3 flashes only, and no story between them. Flash 1. The tungsten drift pin, no bigger than a man's thumb, driven with a hammer's full arc into the reinforced seam under the lead cutter's arm. There was no burst, no plasma. The shielded chest plate of the lead cutter, which had been rated to defeat 9 kinds of directed energy weapon at close range, turned exactly none of the 2 pounds of tungsten swung by an arm raised on 1 full Earth gravity. The lead cutter's shoulder tore free of its socket. The lead cutter's ribs, which were not human ribs but were an approximation, buckled inward. The lead cutter went sideways off his hooves and did not get up. Flash 2. The drift pin came out of the lead cutter's armpit and was already in Ray Halstead's other hand, and the third cutter, who had raised his plasma cutter to fire and had not fired because he had not expected the drift pin to be a projectile, took the drift pin through the visor of his helm. The sound was small. It sounded like a bottle breaking under a towel. Flash 3. The second cutter, closer than the third, tried to swing his weapon down onto Ray's shoulder, and Ray was not there. Ray was inside the swing. Ray had gotten inside the swing the way a man got inside a swing at a country dance. He put the hammer, not the flat of it but the pin, into the notch under the second cutter's jaw. There was no notch there designed for a hammer. There was a notch there for the seal of a helm. A helm seal was not designed to defeat a pin hammer. She heard the sound of a helm seal failing. The second cutter collapsed as if his tendons had been cut all at once. There was a silence. The fourth cutter and the fifth cutter were still standing. They had not fired. They had not fired because the whole event had taken from the moment the lead cutter's shoulders rolled to the moment the second cutter's tendons let go. Perhaps 4 seconds. They had spent all 4 of those seconds trying to update their picture of what was happening. Their picture had not updated in time. Ray Halstead stood over the 3 bodies in the middle of his shop, with the drift pin in his left hand and the hammer in his right, and his welding leathers hanging open at the collar and the sweat running down his throat. And he looked at the 4th cutter and the 5th cutter, and he said, in a voice with no anger in it, "You still want to be paid." The 4th cutter turned. The 5th cutter turned. They did not run. They did not walk. They did the thing a professional did when a professional had made a mistake about the field, which was to withdraw and mark the target and come back with the correct equipment. They were out of the shop before the door had cycled, and the door hissed shut, and the shop went quiet. Ray Halstead set the hammer down on the anvil. He set the drift pin next to it. He looked at his hand. His hand was shaking. He put his hand into a pocket of his leathers and left it there. Then he called up the stairs without looking. "You all right up there, ma'am?" Kessa realized her mouth was open. Her tongue had gone flat against the floor of it. Her forehead was pressed to the cube door. She could not, for a long moment, remember how to answer him. "Yes," she said finally, in the trade tongue. "Good," said Ray Halstead. "I'm going to put on some water for tea. You come down when you want." He walked to the back wall and put a kettle on the forge. She counted the suits on the floor. 3. She stopped counting. She began again. 3. She lay on her stomach on the floor of the bunk cube with her cheek to the deck plate, and she did the arithmetic that any child of a warhouse learned to do before she was allowed to feed herself. 5 had come. 3 were on the floor. 2 had walked out. 2 were somewhere in the arms of the station. 2, therefore, were still out there. 2, therefore, were unaccounted for. She could not stop counting. 3, 2, 3, 2. Downstairs the kettle began very softly to sing. She came down the stairs when the singing turned to a whistle. Ray Halstead was standing at the workbench with 2 dented mugs and a plastic canister of what smelled like the harsh black tea humans drank when they wanted to stay awake. He poured a mug and held it out to her without looking. She took it with both hands. It was scalding. It smelled like something she did not have a word for. She held it against her chest with both hands, and she looked at the 3 bodies on the floor of the shop. "I called the station master," Ray said. "He is going to send the disposal crew." "Ain't the first time he has sent me the disposal crew. He knows me." She looked at him. Not for this, he said. Steel accidents. Guys who don't clip in. Every station has one guy who don't clip in. She looked back at the bodies. Those two. Ain't done, yeah. They will come back. Yes, ma'am. With more. Yes, ma'am. He drank his tea. He did not look at the bodies. He looked instead at the printout on the wall. The photograph of the trees she did not know, and the ground the color of an old bruise, and the gray sky and the snow. She followed his eyes. That is your home, she said. He did not answer for a moment. Then he said, yes, ma'am, sort of, near enough. Why do you keep the picture? He drank his tea. Because I ain't been back in 22 years and I don't want to forget what the color is. She held the mug against her chest and she said, very carefully in the trade tongue, Mr. Halstead, I am not who you think I am. He looked at her. I am not a girl with a burn under her tusk. I know you ain't. You do? He set the mug on the workbench. He rolled his shoulders once. She heard something in his back click. He looked at her across the shop. You come off the North Dock in leather-cut ceremonial. You got a tusk brand across your collarbone I have seen on ambassadors. You called a Hunter House squad by their exact count from the sound of their boots. You know the shield lines on Hunter plate. I don't know exactly who you are, ma'am. I know you ain't a girl with a burn under her tusk. Kessa found she could not swallow the tea. She held it in her mouth for a long moment. It tasted like something she did not have a word for. My mother, she said finally, is Vorethna Velmoren. Ray Halstead looked at her for a long time. Then he said, then we ought to get moving. The Warmatron's escort came 4 hours later, not by way of Ray's shop door, but by way of the North Dock, in full ceremony, with drums. Kessa heard them from the shop and knew them from the pattern. Velmoren processional. The heavy strike on the first beat and the drag on the third. She had grown up going to sleep to it and waking up to it and eating her morning grain to it, and now, for the first time in her life, she heard it from below the level of her feet, coming up through the deck plate as though the ship of state itself had docked under the shop and was rising to fetch her. Ray Halstead heard it too. He tilted his head. Drums. My mother, Kessa said. She is here. The bodies on the shop floor had by then been taken away by a very quiet crew who did not ask any questions. The lead cutter's chest plate had been left on the anvil along with the drift pin. Ray had cleaned the drift pin on a rag. He put the drift pin in his pocket. He looked at the door. The door slid open. The steward who entered the shop was a Vrothkai of the household caste, in Velmoren colors, and behind him were 4 armored guards, and behind them, entering last as protocol required, was Vorethna Velmoren herself, Warmatron of the Tusk line, matriarch of the clan, 312 standard cycles old, and wearing the black and blood purple of a house at war. Her tusks were capped in silver. There was a long dark burn across her left cheek that Kessa had never seen before, and Kessa understood in a small, terrible flash what her mother had done in the last 4 days to still be alive. The Warmatron looked at her daughter. She did not speak. She did not weep. She did the small close of the eyes, the one for children who had lived. Then she turned her head half a degree and looked at Ray Halstead, who was standing at the anvil with his hands empty and his back straight, and she said, in the trade tongue, without moving her jaw, "You are the plate welder." "Yes, ma'am. You are the one who sewed my daughter's face." "Yes, ma'am. You are also the one who killed 3 of the 5 hunters of House Yeshunka last night, in this shop, with a hammer." Ray Halstead's face did not move. 2 of them, he said. The third was thrown. The Warmatron looked at him for a very long moment. Then she made a small motion with her second finger, and one of the armored guards behind her stepped forward and set a slate on the workbench. The slate lit up. It showed a still frame from a shop camera that Kessa had not known was in the ceiling. The still frame showed Ray Halstead inside the swing of the second cutter. The peen of the hammer was already at the notch under the jaw. His face in the still frame was not angry, and it was not afraid. It was the face of a man who had just finished measuring and was measuring the next thing. "We took the frame from the docking master's log," said the Warmatron. "We would like your permission to run a bone density scan on you before we leave." Ray Halstead looked at the slate. He looked at the Wormatron, he looked at Kessa. Kessa nodded once. "All right," he said. The scan drone came out of a black case a second guard was carrying. It was a small black wasp of a thing that flew a slow circle around Ray at head height. It took him 9 seconds. When it was done, the drone landed on the workbench and beeped politely, and the household steward picked up the slate and read what the drone had written. The steward's mandibles opened a hair. He read again. He looked up. He looked at the Wormatron. He looked at Ray. He looked back at the slate. "Speak," said the Wormatron. "Bone density in the femur," said the steward. 1.94 times human standard. Bone density in the sternum, 2.11 times human standard. Bone density in the skull, 1.88. Cortical thickness abnormal. Muscle attachment site density abnormal. Cardiac output at rest above expected range. He looked up. "Wormatron, the equipment flags this scan as an equipment fault." "It is not an equipment fault." "No, Wormatron. Run the pain tolerance." The steward tapped the slate. The drone lifted off the workbench and buzzed around Ray again and settled and beeped again. The steward read the second screen. He looked at Ray. He looked back at the screen. "Wormatron," he said. "The drone flags this as an equipment fault." The Wormatron looked at Ray Halstead the way a smith looked at a piece of metal that had come out of the forge doing something it was not supposed to do. "You are from where, plate welder?" "Place called Pennsylvania, ma'am." "On Earth?" "Yes, ma'am." "What is the gravity there?" 1 g, ma'am." "Standard." "You lived there how long?" "First 30 years. "And after that?" He did not answer. The Wormatron did not press. She turned her head half a degree in the other direction, and she said to the steward, without heat, "Pull his identity from the Earth registry." "Yes, Wormatron." The steward moved back to the doorway and lifted a slate to his ear and spoke quietly into it in the household tongue. He waited, he waited, he waited. Kessa watched him wait. She had watched enough stewards in enough waiting rooms to know that the query had gone in and gotten stuck was a specific kind of information. The steward turned to look at Ray. He turned back to the slate. He listened. He nodded once, curtly, and cut the line. He walked back to the anvil. His mandibles were very close together. This was the Vrothkai gesture for a man who has been shown, without warning, a shape he did not know the language could describe. "Wormatron," he said, and he said it in the household tongue rather than the trade tongue, so that Ray would not understand. Kessa understood. "The registry has an entry for Ray Halstead, 41 Earth years, Cambria County, Pennsylvania. Trade, plate welder. Certification, hull fitter, Class 2. Combat record, none. Prior military service, none. That is his file. That is one of his files, Wormatron." The Wormatron waited. The steward turned the slate. He held it low so that only she could see. He said quietly, "The registry cross-linked the biometric to a sealed record from the 7th Terran colonial pacification. That colony was interdicted and its documentation was purged. The Terran government does not officially remember the event. The seal did not hold. The record surfaced under the biometric match. There are 2 lines in the record. The first line is a call sign. The second line is a scoring notation. Read it. Call sign. Tokens Herf scoring notation. Confirmed 32 of 35. The Wormatron was silent for the length of one long breath. Then she said, in the trade tongue this time, so that Ray would hear her, and so that Kessa would hear her, and so that every guard in the shop would hear her, "Plate welder, ma'am, do you know what the number 35 refers to?" Ray Halstead did not answer for a long moment. He was looking at the printout on the wall, the trees, the ground the color of an old bruise, the gray sky, the snow. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Do you know what the number 3 refers to?" He looked at her. There was nothing in his face. There was, Kessa thought, a great deal underneath. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I know what the 3 refers to. Would you speak of it?" "No, ma'am." The Wormatron dipped her head half a degree. It was the Vrothka gesture for a matter closed by mutual agreement. She turned to her steward and she said, "Prepare the transport. My daughter comes with us." The steward inclined his head. He turned toward Kessa. Kessa did not move. "Mother," she said. The war matron looked at her. "They sent 5 last night," Kessa said. "They will send 20 tomorrow. They will send 200 the day after. You cannot escort me through the succession corridor without losing more of the household than you can afford to lose. You know this. That is why you did not come for me at the dock." She swallowed. Her jaw hurt where the crystallized wound had closed. "I have thought about this. I would like to ask something of you." The war matron waited. Kessa turned her head to Ray Halstead. "I would like this man to come with us." The steward went very still. Ray Halstead's face did not change. He was looking at the printout on the wall. The war matron looked at Ray. She looked at her daughter. She looked at the anvil and the drift pin and the enameled purple chest plate of the lead cutter, which had been rated to turn 9 kinds of directed energy weapon at close range and which now had a hole through it the diameter of a man's thumb. She said to Ray, without heat, without hope, and without the particular tone that would have made it an order, "Plate welder, my house is small now. The succession corridor between this station and the throne hall of House Velmoren runs 6 days through space that is not friendly to us. I have 5 guards. I had 11 yesterday. I will pay you what you ask." Ray Halstead looked at the printout for a long moment. "I got a shop, ma'am," he said. "I got a lease. I got a contract with the station master to fit hull plate on the north dock through the end of the standard year. I got a bunk cube upstairs and a cot in it that ain't yet paid off. I got a sister on Earth what does not know I ever left the county. And I got, apparently, an old score somebody in the 7th Colonial did not want closed." He paused. "How many of them ended up in House Yashunka's employ, ma'am? Do you happen to know?" The war matron looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned her head half a degree and looked at the steward, and the steward tapped the slate, and the slate did the thing that slates did when a query returned quickly, which meant that the answer had been on file the entire time. The steward read, his mandibles opened a hair. "War matron, 2 of the 3 unaccounted survivors of the 7th Terran colonial pacification are on the personal staff of the matriarch of House Yashunka. They have been on her staff for 11 years. They live in the retainer wing of her throne hall." Ray Halstead looked at the printout on the wall. "All right," he said, "I'll come." He said it the way a man said, "That door needs a new hinge." That was how she would remember it later. She would remember it, and she would not be able to explain to anyone why the sentence had felt in that moment like a door closing in the wall of the universe. They packed him in 14 minutes. He put a small bag of tools together, 2 hammers, 3 drift pins, a packet of the black tea, the dented mug, the paperback book, the photograph in the bent silver frame. He put the welding coat back on. He set the printout of the Pennsylvania trees carefully in the bottom of the bag. He locked the shop door with a smart lock, and he put a paper sign under the shop bell that said, hand-scrawled with the stylus, "Back in a month or so, no small jobs." He looked at the sign for a moment. He shrugged. He walked with them to the north dock. The transport was a Velmoren house ship, black with the Tuskline sigil in silver on the flank, built for weight and for the pattern of the drums that rolled slow across the deck plating as the ramp came down. Ray Halstead looked at the ship. He did not comment on the ship. He walked up the ramp beside Kessa without ceremony, and he sat in the seat the steward pointed him to, in the passenger bay near the ramp, and he put his tool bag under the seat and clipped in. Kessa sat across from him. She held her hands in her lap. Her mother sat forward in the command bay with the pilot and the steward and did not look back. 2 of the guards sat at each end of the passenger bay with their weapons across their knees. The ramp closed, the bay pressurized, the ship rose, the engines were quiet. The Velmoren engineers built quiet engines. Kessa listened to the quiet and to the small tick of the seat straps against the deck and to Ray Halstead's slow, even breath across from her. He had closed his eyes. He was not, she realized, asleep. He was doing the thing a soldier did when a soldier had 6 days between now and the next fight. He was banking his heartbeat, she said, in the trade tongue, quietly. Mr. Halstead. He opened one eye. Thank you. For what, ma'am? For the coat, she said. He closed the eye. She thought he was not going to answer. Then he said, without opening it, "It ain't the coat." She waited. "The medic said no," he said. "That's a different sort of thing. You ever see somebody at a bus stop in a place that don't have buses no more, waving down a bus that ain't coming, and somebody watches them do it for a while and then walks past them and don't say nothing? That's a different sort of thing than not having a bus. That's a decision. Somebody in that hallway had to make a different decision. Wasn't nothing to it." Kessa did not know what a bus stop was. She said yes. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, without opening his eye, "Also they was 5 and I was 1, and I don't like odds like that." She thought about that. "Mr. Halstead," she said, "there were 5 of them, and there was 1 of you, and you did not seem to consider it unusual." He opened both eyes then, and he looked at her, and he shrugged. "Ain't the numbers, ma'am. Ain't ever the numbers. It's the seams. Every armor's got seams. Every enemy's got seams. You find the seam, you keep finding it, and it don't matter how many of them there is. It just takes longer." She looked at him. "That is not how our fighters think," she said. "I ain't a fighter, ma'am. You are a smith. I'm a smith, and a smith finds seams." He almost smiled. "A smith makes the seam so ain't nothing can find it, ma'am. Which means a smith knows where the seams are, which means when a smith wants to break something instead of build it, a smith knows where to hit." He closed his eyes again. She thought about the drift pin, the way he had put it into the notch under the lead cutter's arm. She thought about how he had done it before the plasma cutter came up. She thought about how, on the shop floor of the 7th Terran Colonial Pacification, 32 hunters of some kind had died with drift pins in the seams of their armor and hammers in the seals of their helms. She thought about the number 3 and the number 2 and the number 1 that was going to have to close before Ray Halstead was going to be able to open his eyes for good. "Mr. Halstead, ma'am." The 3rd. He did not open his eyes. But his face changed, in the small way that a face changes when a person hears a question he has been waiting to hear. "The 3rd what?" "The 3rd of the 3. He did not answer for a long time. "There ain't one," he said finally. "There's 2. There always was 2. The scoring was off. I let it be off. I did not correct it. I let them think there was 1 left that I had missed. I let them think it because the 3rd was somebody who didn't deserve to be looked for." "Who?" He opened his eyes. "Ain't your business, ma'am. Ain't nobody's business." "Very well." He looked at her a long moment. Then he said, "It was a boy. He was 15 standard. He was in the wrong village on the wrong day, and he had a rifle in his hand because somebody put one there. I took the rifle from him. I let him walk. He walked away, and he lived his life. He is somebody's father now. My officer wrote him down in the scoring, and I did not correct it because the officer wrote it wrong on purpose. The officer had his own reasons. Then the officer died. Then the file got sealed. Then the seal got broken. So now some clerk on earth thinks I owe him a body. I don't owe him a body. That is the 3rd one. Ain't never going to be a 3rd one." She sat with that for a while. Then she said, very softly, "There will be 2. "Yes, ma'am." "On House Yeshunka's staff." "Yes, ma'am." "You have known this for how long?" "Since your mother's man read out the number 35. You did not react." "No, ma'am." "But you decided in that moment." "No, ma'am. I decided when the medic said no." She looked at him. He closed his eyes. The transport hummed. Kessa closed her own eyes. She did not sleep. She listened to the drums in the deck plate. She listened to the man across from her breathing slow. They took 2 days to reach the outer marker of the succession corridor. Ray Halstead spent most of it in the passenger bay. He drank the black tea from the dented mug. He read the paperback book. Kessa asked once what the book was about, and he shrugged and said, "A man in a coat looks for a woman in a city," and Kessa nodded as though this was information, and he did not elaborate. He helped one of the guards clean a jammed action on a household carbine. He did not ask how the carbine had come to be jammed. The guard, who was called Durentia and who was Kessa's second cousin on the eldest branch, did not offer. When Ray handed the carbine back, working, the guard said, "You have done that before, plate welder," and Ray said, "I have unstuck a lot of things, my friend," and the guard laughed, which was a very small hooting sound in Avroskai's throat, and then remembered his composure and did not laugh again. On the second day, the household steward brought Ray a slate. On the slate was a diagram of the throne hall of House Yeshunka. Ray studied it for a long time. He did not ask any questions. Then he asked one question. He asked which pillar of the audience floor was structural and which was ornamental, and the steward's mandibles closed slightly because he had been afraid Ray was going to ask something else, and the steward said, "The 4 inner pillars are structural, the 8 outer pillars are ornamental, and the ornamental pillars are hollow," and Ray nodded once and returned the slate. At the outer marker on the third morning, a courier ship put alongside the transport and passed a sealed capsule to the pilot. The pilot brought it to the Warmatron in the command bay. The Warmatron read the capsule. Her face did not move. She summoned Kessa. Kessa entered the command bay. The Warmatron handed her the capsule. Kessa read it. The capsule was from a household steward of an allied clan. The steward had, 3 cycles earlier, become aware of a small piece of information which he had judged unimportant at the time. In light of recent events, he had come to feel differently. The information was that Avrothkai of the Velmoran household caste, name of Turaknal, had in the last cycle been observed in the presence of a courier belonging to House Yeshunka on 4 occasions, always at the same tea hall in the trade quarter, always at the 4th chime of the 2nd watch. The steward apologized for having failed to report the observation earlier. He requested that the matter be handled by the Warmatron personally rather than through the household guard, as Turiknal held the seat of chief of the guard, and any move by the guard against him would give him time to react. Kessa read the capsule twice. She looked at her mother. "Turiknal has been chief of the guard for 11 years, mother." "Yes." "He escorted me from the birth hall." "Yes." "He is on this ship." "Yes." Vorethna Velmoran looked out through the forward window of the command bay at the black. She was silent for a very long moment. Then she said, "He is not on this ship, mother. He requested leave 4 days ago to attend to his grandson's naming rite. I granted it. He is not on this ship. He is at his grandson's naming rite. Then he will meet us at the throne hall gate, as chief of the guard is required to do." Kessa was silent. "He arranged the ambush at the docking ring," she said. "Yes." "He arranged the ambush at the shop." "Almost certainly." "He will open the gate for House Yeshunka's assault force the moment we arrive." "That is my expectation." Kessa closed her eyes. "Mother, daughter, we are walking into a trap." "Yes." "With 5 guards and a plate welder." "Yes." "Why?" The Warmatron did not answer for a while. She looked at the black. Kessa waited. She had grown up in that waiting. "Because," said the Warmatron finally, "if we do not walk into it, we will be hunted through the corridor for the next 3 cycles. Because the assault force is at the gate whether or not we come. Because the matriarch of House Yeshonka has committed too much strength to this move to fall back from it, and if we return to Series 9 or scatter into the trade lane, she will hunt us until she runs out of hunters. And she will not run out of hunters, because she has bought most of them from the trade lane houses on a lien against her own throne room. She is desperate. Desperate people cannot be waited out. Desperate people must be walked to." She paused. "Also because the plate welder has already made the same decision, and I am not, apparently, going to be the Warmatron who was less bold than a hull fitter from a place called Pennsylvania." Kessa looked at her mother for a long moment. "Yes, mother," she said. "Return to the passenger bay. Do not tell the plate welder about Turiknal. He will smell it well enough on his own." Kessa returned to the passenger bay. Ray Halstead was reading the paperback. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her face. He set the paperback down. He said, without preamble, "Somebody on the ship." She stared at him. "How did you?" The steward keeps looking at the doorway of the command bay like he expects somebody to walk through it that ain't going to. And the second guard has moved his weapon 3 times in the last hour. He is trying to find a position from which he can cover the ramp door and the command bay door at the same time. There ain't one, so he keeps moving. So somebody on the ship, or somebody we're going to meet, is expected to come at us from behind. Which one is it? She swallowed. Somebody we're going to meet, she said. All right, Chief of the Guard. He nodded slowly. All right. He picked up the paperback and turned the page. She watched him. Mr. Halstead, ma'am, are you afraid? He looked up. He seemed to consider the question honestly. I have been afraid, ma'am. It ain't a useful thing. I ain't afraid right now. I might get afraid later. I got a lot to do before then. You want tea? Yes. He boiled water on the little galley plate. He handed her a mug. She held it against her chest. They dropped out of the corridor above the moon, called Velmoran Prime, on the 5th morning. The moon was gray-green, cratered, alive along the terminator with the small lights of the Tusk Line's old cities. The throne hall stood on a spur of black rock at the edge of the largest crater. The transport put down on the outer pad. The chief of the guard, Turek Nal, was waiting at the pad in full ceremony. He was a broad, gray-plated Vrothkai of an age with the Warmatron in the deep purple and black of the household, with his own sigil embroidered on the cross belt across his chest. He met the ramp with the household guard around him, and he inclined his head to the Warmatron in the correct fashion, and he did not look at Ray Halstead at all. Ray Halstead looked at him. That was all Ray Halstead did. He looked at him. He walked down the ramp beside Kessa with his tool bag over his shoulder, and he looked at the chief of the guard for the length of a step, and then his eyes went past the chief of the guard to the throne hall gate, and to the shape of the hall beyond it, and to the position of the 4 inner structural pillars that the steward had marked for him, and to the position of the 8 outer ornamental pillars that were hollow, and to the small dark line of retainers standing along the interior wall in the deep purple of a house that did not officially exist yet, of a house that was about to exist very publicly, and back to the ceremonial guard behind Turek Nal, and back to Turek Nal. Turek Nal felt the look. His mandibles closed a hair. He did not meet the look. He turned instead to the Warmatron and spoke the words of welcome. The words of welcome were long. In the middle of them, the outer ornamental pillars of the throne hall opened along seams that Kessa had never noticed because she had not been looking for them, and out of the hollows of the ornamental pillars came 12 hunters of House Yeshunka in the deep purple armor, with the plasma cutters in their hands and the shielded chest plates that could turn 9 kinds of directed energy weapon at close range. 12, not 5, 12. Turek Nal's ceremonial guard drew their weapons and turned them on the household guard of Velmoran. 6 of Turek Nal's guard against the 5 of the Warmatron's escort, plus the 12 hunters. That was, by Kessa's count, 18. There were, on the Velmoran side, 5 guards, 1 Warmatron, 1 steward, 1 bleeding 17-cycle heir, and 1 Ray Halstead. The steward went down first. He took a pulse lens to the throat and folded. The first of the Warmatron's guards, Durentia, whose carbine Ray had unstuck, got 2 of the ceremonial guard with his carbine before the third got him under the plate. 2 more of the household guard took hunter fire and fell in the doorway of the audience hall. The 4th and the 5th got the Warmatron behind a structural pillar and stood in front of her with their carbines up. The 12 hunters spread across the whole floor in the trained pincer that hunter-cast plate armor drilled into every young hunter before he was allowed to eat with his own hands. Turek Nal, chief of the guard of Velmoran for 11 years, turned to Kessa with a plasma cutter in his hand and the mandibles of a man about to say something with weight. He did not get to say it. Ray Halstead had, at some point during the words of welcome, taken the drift pin from his pocket into his left hand and a hammer from the bag over his shoulder into his right, and Ray Halstead did the thing he had done in the shop, only faster, because the distance was shorter, and the drift pin took the chief of the guard through the notch under the arm where the ceremonial cross belt sagged the plate away from the ribs. Ray twisted the drift pin. He pulled it out. He caught the chief of the guards, dropping plasma cutter with his left hand, and put it into Kessa's hand and shoved her behind the same structural pillar the Wormatron was behind. And he did not look at the chief of the guard again. "Stay here," he said to Kessa. He walked out into the middle of the hall. He was not running, he was walking. He was walking the way a man walked across the floor of a shop toward the anvil. The hammer was in his right hand, the drift pin was in his left. He had put the tool bag down without ceremony beside the pillar. He had left the welding coat open at the throat. The 12 hunters saw him. The lead hunter of the 12, whose armor was chased with the silver of a captain, made the small stutter that a professional made when a professional was seeing something he could not fit into his picture of the field. He said, in the trade tongue that his translator caught up to a beat late, "Human, this is not your fight, withdraw." Ray Halstead did not answer. The lead hunter fired. The plasma cutter fired a lance of ionized gas at the speed of light adjacent. It hit Ray Halstead in the left shoulder of the welding coat. The coat, which was made of oil-cured leather with a scale of tungsten fiber woven into the lining, because Ray was a hull fitter and hull fitters knew what the working end of a plasma torch could do to a shoulder, absorbed the lance. The lance burned a hole through the outer layer and lost itself in the tungsten scale and left a long red wheal on Ray Halstead's shoulder under the leather. Ray Halstead did not stop. He took the drift pin out of his left hand and threw it. It went past the head of the second hunter and into the throat of the third hunter, who had been raising a second cutter, and the third hunter went down. Ray Halstead was inside the second hunter's swing before the second hunter had finished the swing. The pin of the hammer went into the helm seal under the second hunter's jaw. The second hunter went down. That was 3 seconds. The fourth hunter fired. The lance hit Ray Halstead in the ribs on the right side. This time the tungsten scale in the coat lining slowed the lance but did not stop it. The lance opened a long red furrow across the ribs. Ray Halstead grunted. He kept moving. He put the hammer through the fourth hunter's visor, and the fourth hunter went down. That was 4. The lead hunter of the 12 fired twice, calmly, into Ray Halstead at close range. The first lance hit the coat and burned through and hit the shoulder, and Ray Halstead spun a quarter turn from the impact and did not fall. The second lance came in low, under the coat, and took him through the meat of the side. Kessa saw the lance come out through the back of his coat, and the coat smoked, and Ray Halstead went down on one knee. Kessa raised the plasma cutter Ray had put in her hand. She had never fired a plasma cutter in her life. She fired it. The lance went wide and hit the ceiling. She fired again. The lance took the lead hunter of the 12 in the plate over the belly, where the fashion of the hunter houses had smoothed the plate away for the sash of achievement, and the lead hunter of the 12 went down. She did not know what she had done. She lowered the plasma cutter. Her hands were shaking. The Wormatron had a hand on her shoulder. Ray Halstead was still on one knee. He looked at his side. He looked at the 4 remaining hunters, and the 8 of the 12 now on the floor, and the situation, and he made the sound a smith made when the weld was going to have to be laid in an inconvenient place. Then he did something Kessa would tell her grandchildren about, standing in the audience hall of the Tusk Line, 60 cycles after the fact. Ray Halstead reached into the pocket of his welding coat, and he pulled out a small brown packet, and he tore the packet open with his teeth, and he pulled out of the packet a long white strip of gauze and a small metal object that Kessa did not have a word for. He set the metal object against the entry wound in his side. He turned the small dial at the top of the metal object. The metal object made a small crack and closed something in the wound with a click that sounded exactly like a spent shell hitting a shop floor. Ray Halstead's face did not move. He turned the dial again. Another click, another, 6 clicks. He stuffed the gauze into what was left of the hole. He pulled the coat closed over it. He stood up. The 4 remaining hunters had not moved. They had not moved because they were watching him staple himself closed. "Don't be delicate," Ray Halstead said to no one in a voice that Kessa understood was for himself. "Fill the hole." He walked toward the 4 hunters. The first of them broke. He did not run, he did not shout, he simply stepped back once and dropped his cutter and put his hands out to the side, which was the hunter caste gesture for "I withdraw my contract," which was a thing a hunter did only when the hunter had understood that the contract had been miswritten. The second and the third looked at him. Then the second did the same, then the third. The fourth did not. The fourth had been at the back and had a clear line and had been very still through all of this. Kessa realized, seeing him move for the first time, that the fourth had not been part of the 12. The fourth was in the deep purple of House Yeshunka, but the plate under the paint was of a slightly different cut. The fourth had been trained differently. The fourth had been on the personal staff of a matriarch of a great house for 11 years, on the retainer wing, in the throne hall, on a moon whose name the humans did not officially remember. The fourth raised his cutter with the calm hand of a man who had raised a rifle before. Ray Halstead looked at him. "There you are," Ray Halstead said. The fourth fired. The lance took Ray Halstead in the left thigh. Ray Halstead grunted. He did not fall. He shifted his weight to the right leg. The lance made a small red star on the leather over his thigh and cauterized itself. He took another step. The fourth fired again. The lance took Ray in the same thigh, an inch higher. Ray took another step. Ray Halstead with a hammer closed the last 2 meters between him and the last name on the old list of the 7th Terran Colonial Pacification. He did not use the hammer. He reached the fourth in 3 steps. His right hand went past the raised cutter and caught the fourth by the strap of the plate under the arm. His left hand came up unarmed, and he put the flat of his palm under the fourth's chin, and he tipped the fourth's head back. Then he broke the fourth's neck with the heel of the hammer that had appeared in the same motion in his right hand. The fourth folded. Ray Halstead looked at the folded shape on the floor for a long moment. Then he sat down on the floor next to it. He put the hammer across his knees. He put a hand into his coat and pressed it to his side. He was bleeding through the gauze, through the coat, through the tungsten scale. He looked very tired. There was a silence. Kessa realized, distantly, that the silence had the shape of the ones in the shop. It was the ritual silence of a hall full of people who had just understood, at the same moment, what they had been sharing a room with. The 3 surviving hunters stood with their hands out to the side and did not move. The Wormatron stepped out from behind the structural pillar. She walked across the floor of the throne hall. She walked past the folded shapes of the 12 hunters, past the folded shape of her chief of the guard, past the folded shape of her steward. She did not look at any of them. She walked to Ray Halstead, who was sitting on the floor with his hand pressed to his side, and she looked down at him. "Plate welder," she said. "Ma'am, are you dying?" He looked at the hand on his side. He looked up at her. He shrugged, one shoulder only. "I ain't sure yet, ma'am." She lowered herself slowly to one knee beside him. It was the gesture, in her culture, that a Wormatron performed exactly once in her life, on the day of her elevation, before the throne of her mother. Kessa saw the household guards at the doorway stiffen. "You are not going to die today, plate welder," the Wormatron said. "There is a physician in the 2nd tier. He will attend you now, because the matter of signatory has become uninteresting. Then you will stand up. Then you will sit at my right hand at the table of the tusk line. Then, if it pleases you, you may leave with anything from my house that can be carried, and my hand at your back for as long as I have a hand." Ray Halstead looked at her for a long moment. "Ma'am," he said, "I appreciate that. I do. Can I get some water first?" She looked at him. Her mandibles closed slightly. It was, Kessa realized, the closest her mother had come to a laugh in 20 cycles. "Water. Yes, plate welder. You may have some water." The physician of the 2nd tier came very quickly. He was a small, hurried Vrothkai with 2 assistants and a case of instruments and no interest whatsoever in the political history of the last 4 hours. He cut Ray Halstead's welding coat off him. He measured the wound in the side. He measured the wound in the thigh. He measured the burn across the shoulder. He said something to his assistants in the household tongue that Kessa translated for herself as, "He should be dead." His assistants did not react to this. He set to work. The wound in the side had gone through. There had been intestine damage. There had been muscle damage. The physician packed and closed and packed and closed, and Ray Halstead lay on a stretcher in the middle of the throne hall with his eyes on the ceiling and did not make a sound. Kessa sat beside him. She had put her hand on the strap of his boot, which was as far up his body as she had thought she was allowed to touch him. "Mr. Halstead, ma'am, there will not be a 4th of the old list. No, ma'am. There will not be a 33rd. No, ma'am. You did not need to leave the shop." He turned his head a fraction. He looked at her under the tusk. The stitching on her cheek had held. "You are a lot of trouble, ma'am. Yes, you are worth the trouble." She did not know how to answer that. She sat with her hand on his boot until the physician was done, and until they moved him to a proper bed in the 2nd tier, and until the fever the wound had thrown at him broke on the 2nd day, and until, on the 3rd day, Ray Halstead opened both eyes at once and looked at her and said, "Is there coffee in this galaxy?" She had a cup brought to him. It was not coffee. It was the closest thing the household kitchens could produce on short notice, which was a black bitter tea of a berry that had, in its distant ancestry, some of the same alkaloids. Ray Halstead drank it. He made the face of a man reviewing a poor weld. "Ain't coffee," he said. "No, Mr. Halstead. Ain't bad. No." He looked at her over the mug. "You all right, ma'am?" "Yes, Mr. Halstead. They gonna keep coming at you." "No, Mr. Halstead. The other houses have been sending messengers since the day of the audience hall. The matriarch of House Yeshunka has withdrawn her claim to the corridor. Her staff has been dissolved. Her retainer wing has been searched. There were no other names from your old list on the wing. My mother has asked the Standing Council to reinstate the Velmoran as a full signatory. The Standing Council has voted. We are reinstated. The clinics of the trade lane will treat me if I bleed now." He nodded. "Good. The medic on Series 9 has been transferred. Where to?" "Somewhere colder." Ray Halstead made a sound that was almost a laugh. "He will do fine." She looked at him for a while. Then she took a breath and she said the thing she had spent 3 days composing. "Mr. Halstead, my mother wishes to offer you something. She wishes to offer you a title. She wishes to offer you the ring of the tusk line, which is the token of a household son. She wishes to offer you a small fleet. She wishes to offer you a house on the western tier of the throne hall with a garden of the black orchids and a stipend that would carry your household through 6 generations. She wishes to offer you the right to sit at the tusk line table at any hour for as long as you live. She wishes to offer you the right to bring your sister from the county called Cambria and to place her under the household mantle, if she will accept. She wishes me to tell you all of this. And she wishes me to ask you what you would accept." Ray Halstead drank his not coffee. He looked at the ceiling of the 2nd tier of the throne hall of House Velmoran for a long moment. It was carved in the pale white stone of the moon called Velmoran Prime, in a pattern of tusks and cross belts and small stars that Kessa had grown up going to sleep under. He looked at it as though he was reading it. Then he looked back at her. "Ma'am," he said, "tell your mother I am much obliged. Tell her I ain't a household son. Tell her I ain't going to wear a ring. Tell her the fleet would sit in dock because I don't know what to do with a fleet. Tell her the house on the western tier is very kind, but a house that big would just have rooms in it I didn't use. Tell her the garden is beautiful, but I ain't got a green thumb. Tell her the stipend is more money than my grandfather ever saw. Tell her I ain't got use for it. Tell her about the seat at the table. That one is very kind and I will use it from time to time when I come to visit, because I will come to visit." He drank his nut coffee. "You tell her, ma'am, that if she wants to give me something, I would like a working kettle in a small shop on Ceres 9 and a day off and passage back on any ship that is going that way. That is what I would take." Kessa looked at him. "That is all. That is all, ma'am." "Mr. Halstead." "Ma'am, that is not enough." He almost smiled. "Ma'am, it is more than enough. I got what I came for, and I did not come for a fleet. I came because there was 2 names on a list that was still open, and now the list is closed. I got no other business here, and I got a shop what needs opening. And I got a sister on earth what does not know I have ever left the county, and I would like her to keep on not knowing, and a title on this moon would find its way, sooner or later, into a report on earth, and I do not want that report." Kessa held her cup with both hands. "Also," Ray Halstead said, "I do not wash windows." Kessa looked at him. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Halstead. They will ask me, sooner or later. If I stay, they will ask me to wash a window in a ceremonial hall in front of a lot of people. They will call it a ritual. They will mean well. But it will be a window, and I do not wash windows. I never did. My father was a plate welder before me, and my grandfather was a butcher, and neither one of them ever washed a window in his life. It ain't a family trade, so I would like to go home, ma'am." Kessa stared at him for a long moment. Then she began, without quite knowing why, to laugh. It was a low, hooting Vrothkai laugh, and once it started, it did not want to stop, and she put her hand over her mouth around it, and it kept going, and Ray Halstead watched her over the mug of the nut coffee with the mildest amusement in his face. And eventually she stopped, and wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, and said, "Mr. Halstead, I will convey your request, all of it, including the windows." "Thank you, ma'am." She stood up. She looked at him a long moment. She did the small close of the eyes, the one for children who had lived. "Mr. Halstead, ma'am, when I was 17 standard cycles old, a medic on a station said no, and a plate welder gave me his coat. I would like you to know that I will remember that as long as there is a Velmoran to remember anything." Ray Halstead looked at her. He did not answer for a moment. Then he said, "Ma'am, I would like you to know that ain't nothing to remember. It was a coat. It was not a coat, Mr. Halstead." "I know," he said, "but you tell them it was a coat. That is how I would like it told." They put him on a courier ship on the 9th day. He was still moving slowly. The wound in the side had closed. The wound in the thigh had closed. The burn on the shoulder had scarred in a long pink line that would fade over the years to a pale silver line the color of an old dime. He walked to the ramp under his own strength with his tool bag over his shoulder and his welding coat, which the household seamstresses had patched with the tungsten thread of the tusk line over his back. In the pocket of the coat, folded flat, was the photograph in the bent silver frame, and the paperback book he had not finished, and the dented mug, and a small envelope of the blackberry the household kitchens had used to brew him his not coffee. The war matron had insisted on the berry. She had said it was, unfortunately, the closest thing available. Ray had accepted it with a nod. At the ramp he turned. Kessa stood at the bottom of the ramp with the household guard behind her, in the blackened blood purple of the tusk line, on the pad of black rock at the edge of the largest crater of the moon called Velmoran Prime. The wind that came off the crater was cold and dry and smelled of ash. She had a scar under her left tusk that would be with her for the rest of her life. She raised her hand. "Mr. Halstead, ma'am, if you ever need anything." "I know, ma'am. Anything at all." He almost smiled. "I know, ma'am. Even a fleet, especially not a fleet, ma'am." She lowered her hand. "Goodbye, Mr. Halstead." He raised his hand once. It was a small gesture, and slow, and it was not a soldier's gesture. It was the gesture of a man closing up a shop for the night. "See you around, ma'am." Then he turned, and he went up the ramp, and the ramp closed, and the courier ship rose slow off the pad, and the small lights of it climbed into the pale sky of the moon called Velmoran Prime, and Kessa stood on the black rock and watched it climb, and she watched it until she could not see it any longer, and then she watched the sky for a while after that. On Waypoint Series 9, 4 weeks later, the paper sign came off the shop bell. The smart lock clicked. The lights came up. The forge went on. A hand-scrolled slate in the front window advertised, in the block letters of station standard, Halstead, plate welding, hull fitting, repair. Under the block letters, someone had added a second line in the same stylus, "No small jobs." And then, in a slightly different hand, added later, "Small jobs occasionally considered." The medic on Series 9 did not come back. His replacement was a large, four-armed Keswick from the southern trade lanes who had no patience with the signatory system and a large opinion about the humans of the mid-arm stations, most of whose bones she had at one time or another set. When she came off shift her second week, she walked past Halstead's shop, and she looked in the window. Ray Halstead was leaning against the anvil with a mug of tea in one hand and a paperback in the other, and there was a young girl beside him in a coat 2 sizes too big for her, being shown how to hold a hammer. The girl was Vrothkai. She had a small pale silver line under her left tusk. The Keswick medic looked at the two of them for a long moment. Then she went home to sleep. That was the shape of it, in the end. 6 standard cycles later, the war matron of a great house sent an armored escort to waypoint Ceres 9 to collect her daughter's remains, and did not find a corpse. She found instead a shop above a stairwell and a mountain of dead hunters in the alley, and a plate welder who had killed 3 of 5 with a hammer, and one orphaned tusk hare who had, in the seasons since, learned to swing a peen and to boil a kettle and to find the seam under the arm. The plate welder came, in time, to be spoken of on the trade lanes in a way that made the hunter caste captains reroute their contracts. He was called, on the lanes, by the call sign the sealed Terran file had given him. He was called Hearth. He was not called it to his face, because to his face he was Ray Halstead, 41 Earth years, from a place called Cambria County, in a place called Pennsylvania he called only cold. He wore his sister's old locket under the welding leathers. He drank a blackberry that was not coffee. He did not wash windows, and whenever a young steward of a great house came to him on Sirius 9, cap in hand, with the offer of a title or a ring or a fleet, he thanked the steward, and he offered the steward some of the nut coffee, and he said, always in the same words, in the trade tongue that his translator Patch caught up to a beat late, "We ain't invincible, my friend. We bleed, we break, we die. It's just that we make the other fellow die a little quicker. Now sit down and drink your tea." What a ride! The real strength was never in the hammer, and it was never in the drift pin, and it was never in the bones raised on one full gravity of a small cold county. The real strength was in the man who saw a girl bleeding in a hallway that said no, and who decided, quietly, without ceremony, that the hallway was going to say yes tonight, even if he had to be the one to say it. Because the seams that hold a galaxy together are not welded by councils, or by fleets, or by the matriarchs of great houses. They are welded, one at a time, by hull fitters who have needles and boiled water and no plan yet. If this story meant something to you, leave your like. It is what keeps stories like this on the air. Share it with somebody who loves science fiction about the human who stands in the doorway when the doorway is the whole point. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so the next episode of the Humanity Heck Yeah saga does not slip past you in the feed. And now the one that will decide the comment section. Would you rather ride out the corridor at the War Matron's right hand and take the ring, the fleet, and the house on the western tier, or would you take Ray Halstead's offer of a working kettle, a day off, and the ride home to the county where nobody knows your name? Tell me below. I read everyone. Keep looking at the stars and stay out of the hallways that say no.